Good morning, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Waterstone Media Podcast. My name is Ryan Kirk, and as always, I am joined by Taylor Crook, a man who needs no introduction because I am running out of superlative adjectives to use for him, but he is probably the best at anything you can think of. Taylor, how are you doing this week?
I am wonderful, thanks. How are you?
I am doing pretty well. It has been a fun week. Let's just dive right into it this week. We are concluding our three-part series talking about fights and fight scenes. And the subject that we wanted to come up with was actually our favorite fight scenes not in movies or TV, because I feel like that is its own thing. And so I will confess, Taylor, that I have two that spring immediately to mind. How many are you dealing with over there?
One. It's really one, essentially. It's, yeah. There's
fantastic.
There's some context to be given on mine.
Okay, so should I just start off with one of my favorite fight scenes?
Yeah, why don't you start with your first one?
Sounds good. So I will endeavor to try to keep this as spoiler-free as possible, even going so far as to not mention specific names, because it is a fight scene that takes place maybe well over halfway through the second book in a trilogy.
Right.
But it is a big fight between two... Boy, trying to avoid spoilers is going to be hard here.
So two people...
When two people get together and hate each other very much, you get this fight scene. It is a fight scene between two individuals who are in roles of leadership in their families and clans in the fantasy series, or specifically in the fantasy book Jade War by Fonda Lee, which I believe I've spoken about. I think it made one of my top fantasy stories of all time.
I think so.
And to just recap briefly, it is basically the combination of a kung fu action movie combined with superhuman magical abilities related to wearing jade, combined with a 1920s gangster movie. And I am here for all of it. All of it is fantastic. It is about family and honor and trust and betrayal and all of the themes that you want your books to be about, and beautifully written by Fonda Lee. And there is a fight scene in the second book where two of the individuals are dueling with one another. And for anyone who's read the series, you'll know exactly the fight scene that I'm talking about. But it is a situation in which they've been offered what is called a clean blade, which means that whatever the outcome of the fight, and it is expected that one of the combatants would die, that there will be no lasting repercussions. There will be no calls for revenge from the losing family. And there are several things that I just adore about this fight scene. The first, and this is really hard to do, is as a reader, you come into this fight scene with a true sense of uncertainty. This is a series in which not all characters make it through, and not all characters make it through even to the end, to the final fight scene. And so, you have been conditioned that at any point in time, any character you love may die on the page in front of you. And the way this fight is set up, it's not anywhere near the end of the book, but you have absolutely no idea who is going to emerge triumphant and who is going to be dead at the end of the fight. And so the tension is high. Last week, Taylor, you and I were talking about how much detail to put into a fight scene. And this was one where the amount of detail was perfect. It was vivid. You could see it in your mind's eye. And yet, it still left plenty for the imagination. It was a brutal, drawn-out fight. And it did what I love to see most in a fight scene. And that is that it brought out sides of the characters we had not yet seen, which is remarkable considering this is 500 to 600 pages into the story. And so, for all of those reasons, it is one of my favorite fight scenes that has ever been put on the page. And yeah, I actually remember when I finished the chapter it was in, even before going on and continuing reading, I went back and I read the fight scene again, which, considering these days I'm more likely to skip fight scenes than read them, it just speaks to both Fonda Lee's talent and the story that she's written.
Yeah, that's cool. That sounds like something I want to check out now. I think I put it on my list after actually our thing is on my list of books now. So
they're really, really good.
So I sort of came to a realization as you tasked me with thinking about what's my favorite fight scene in a book, that a real combat scene does not really stick out in my brain. And it made me wonder, okay, well, if that's not sticking with me, then what is the conflict in a book that does? And there are a couple of scenes that I'd like. I mean, if you want to call it a fight scene, there's a scene and I haven't gotten to it yet, so it's not just a recency bias thing, but in the Gap cycle, where this really outclassed ship is fighting this dreadnought that it can't put a scrape on, but it just needs to keep it involved long enough that someone else can get away. And so it's talking about the maneuvers that it's doing and things like that. And, that sticks out in my mind. And I think it sort of made me realize, well, what is the thing that if I'm reading before bed, this fight scene or whatever it might be is keeping me from going to sleep. I'm reading the next chapter because I want to know what's going on. And I think if you can put me in a unique scenario, I think that's what really gets me. So what stuck out most in my mind was in the Apprentice Adept series by Piers Anthony. They have, in the science fiction world, because the planet is split into two, it's by an invisible curtain, they call it. One is the fantasy version of the planet called Phase, and the other is the science fiction-y version of the planet called Proton. And on Proton, it's still a serfdom, essentially. Like, there's serfs and there's people with money and blah, blah, blah. So one way that the poor people can ascend is through what they call the game. And when they go to play the game, there's this big board, and it's sort of a randomized challenge, and you pick, each opponent gets to pick one of each, and as it cycles down, it might be physical and music and outside and this, and it randomizes essentially, and then they have this thing that they have to compete in. Maybe it's one thing was a musical contest, one's a marathon, they've had fights, but something like that is going to stick out in my mind a lot more than say one, big set piece fight scene, which obviously, matter. And I think about them, they're cool. The Two Towers obviously has one of the most famous battle scenes in any fantasy book. And I love that. And I still think about it, but I thought if there's not something that jumps to mind like that, but that this, the game context, it jumps to mind similar to Ender's Game, all of his training that goes through and the battle room and all of those like little pieces there. So yeah, it's not something I have an answer for. It's not like I have this brilliant, well, it's not combat, but it's one of those ineffable things. But for me, I think there is something to be said for giving me a way to resolve the issue that is not a fist fight or a duel, or I want those things too. But, what's the unique challenge or the unique way that you've managed to move me through this? And I think those tend to stick out to me.
Was that really surprising to you that when you were trying to think of truly memorable fight scenes that you were having a hard time coming up with anything?
Yeah, it was, because it's not like I don't enjoy a good fight scene. I'd have a list of 20 of my favorite fight scenes in movies or TV shows. But it's, I think it's the medium, right? And it's not, again, not to say I don't enjoy reading a good fight scene, because I really do. I'm interested in reading that book now that you described, just because of how you talked about that. All of the things, like, it sets it up really well. I love that stuff. But in terms of jumping out in my mind, yeah, it was a little surprising. I figured that there would be something that I really enjoyed, and there was other ways that stuck out more to me.
See, I feel like this is the sort of situation that I really want to actually dive into a little bit, because it is fascinating that for somebody who likes writing fight scenes, as I do too, but I had a similar problem where trying to highlight a specific fight scene was actually pretty difficult.
Yeah.
There are a lot of fight scenes that I've enjoyed reading and some that have been really fun, but the true memorable moments for me in a lot of novels aren't necessarily fight scenes.
No, exactly. They are vehicles that move the story, and they're important, but I agree. I think there's other things that stick out in my mind more so than that. So,
Interesting. So the second fight scene that I came up with is actually, it's not necessarily an individual fight scene so much as it is a collection of fights over the course of a trilogy. And it's actually breaks some of the rules that I have been establishing for myself in terms of what I like. But all of the fights that happen with the magic wielders in the Mistborn series are other fights that I really like. But it's not necessarily because they reveal character, although a lot of them do. But what is so appealing, and I think one of the reasons why Sanderson is such an excellent writer, is because he creates what seems like an ironclad set of rules that his magic exists in. And then he twists those rules, or characters find ways through the rules that you never thought of before that make perfect sense once you actually read them in place. And seeing the way that those rules get bent and twisted and used for different purposes is really fun to read, and does result in some really fun scenes as everything comes together, which is all really, really cool. But as I'm even talking about it, I'm actually thinking that the most memorable scene for me from the whole Mistborn original trilogy, it has nothing to do with fighting at all, but with the role of knowledge and study and it's a reveal that happens right at the end that I won't reveal because, again, it's a spoiler. But to me, that was the most memorable experience with Mistborn, and it had nothing at all to do with fighting. In fact, it had much more to do with creation and healing than anything else.
And even the fighting that you described, it wasn't that it was like, it wasn't like they did this cool magical thing. It was the application of it that you found so interesting. Yeah, as we've done these 3 pods, it just seems to me that the through line for all of them is that combat for the sake of combat is not something that's going to make a good book. You can describe it as beautifully as you want, but if there's not a reason for it, if there's not something to be learned, if there's not a twist, if it's not going to stick with you.
Do you feel like, I mean, as we're literally podcasting live on the internet, do you feel like that is making you reconsider how you're going to look at the fight scenes that you are writing?
Yeah, I mean, potentially it's, but again, I think we, as we said, we talked about in the second of this series of 3 last week, I think we both have an eye for that kind of development. Like, what is the purpose of this fight? I think it remains the same. I think if it's, as long as it's pushing things forward, it's fine. And I do think that I think if you're, as long as you're putting your people into unique situations, that it works. I think the demons that we have populating our world, I think they create a unique conflict. So that, so that works. I mean, maybe yes. It's obviously it's going to inform the way I'm looking at it. Anytime you have an epiphany about something, it carries forward into your work. What I guess I don't think is that I don't think there's going to be necessarily sweeping changes to the way that we do things. I think we have a good balance there. I read a review of our book, and the person described a lot of things positively about there's character development, people you care about, the demons are this, it's very interesting. And then she said, and who doesn't like a good brawl now and then? And I thought that was a good, I think that's how we pop it in. Like we do these other things, and then Beast cracks some skulls. Like I think there's something to be said for that. So
Beast is the sort of character who sometimes I feel like couldn't travel to the outhouse or couldn't eat a meal in a restaurant without getting in a fight with someone.
Oh yeah. Yep. Yeah. I read through at one point. I think I ended up separating some stuff out because I was like, this poor guy is getting into a fight every step he takes in this book. So
I always feel like that is a tried and true technique that you see a lot in thrillers too, where the protagonist, who is secretly a CIA Black Ops agent or special forces or something like that, is out and about, and of course he's going to get mugged.
Yeah, he's the one
every time he goes out to eat. He gets mugged. It's just such a pain. Streets are dangerous when he's out, I guess. But
yeah, well, A History of Violence deals with that kind of nicely. He's got this terrible history, and what happens, where anybody else might have been, mugged or whatever, he can defend himself, and therefore movie goes on. So yeah, it's
So we have talked a lot about fighting for the last couple of weeks here, Taylor. I'm just curious, just as a way to wrap up this. I mean, this is really the first time that we've tried doing something like this where we've spread out a theme over multiple podcasts. Mm-hmm. But what lessons or learnings do you think you're going to be taking forward after we've been talking about this for almost an hour and a half?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing is we just kind of articulated, and we kind of came to the realization at the same time. Is like, what can we do? What can we make unique about the combat and the conflict and the fight and the whatever we have in our story, so that it sticks out. It sticks out for somebody. And again, I objectively, I really do think that we have done with Path specifically, I think we've done a good job of that. We certainly have some unique hurdles for our heroes to kind of overcome. And I do think that continues in the second book as we work through the second draft. Where I'm not quite there yet, but I think the big thing I'll take away is just it's a simple question of asking myself, what are we accomplishing here? I think that's it. What are we accomplishing? And I think if you try and make every interaction unique, then no interaction is unique. So I don't think it necessarily needs to be everything, but it's like, okay, if you, as long as you look at every fight scene with what are we trying to accomplish, and then you seize the opportunity to make that, that one fight scene something special, I think that's what being a good storyteller is about, is just looking for those opportunities.
Yeah, I think we've talked a little bit about how the medium matters too, and how expectations matter. And even going all the way back to when we first started talking about this, with you having the opinion of, if you're watching a martial arts film, you want to just be watching a grounded martial arts film. Mm-hmm. And I think that ties in even all the way to us writing these fight scenes. It's how can we best use the written word and fights in a book to evoke the emotions in the readers that we want to. So, yeah. Cool. Well, on that note, everyone, thank you for joining us on this epic journey. It has been a pleasure. Taylor, thank you as always for enduring dozens of questions that you were not expecting at all. Always appreciated. And for everyone listening, as per usual, all the notes and show notes and transcriptions can be found online. So until next week, everyone take care, and thank you for joining us.
Bye, friends.